Welcome to part 3 of this 3-part series of Passport to Your Pelvis. So this one I am naming Sphincter Sump Pump in My Pelvis, oh my. So just an homage to lions, tigers, and bears, oh my. So what we're going to be talking about, if you listen to part 2, is the sphincters as well as the sump pump. So I'm not going to spend too much time on the anatomy because I really want to spend some time, for the experiential part of the class and really tying everything together. But I'm just going to bring my notes again just so that I have that. I spoke very briefly about circulation and why that's important. Obviously, circulation is just important in general because you want things moving and flowing. You don't want things to be staying stagnant. Again, in our pelvic area, we have a lot of lymph nodes as well as a lot of vasculature. And so when I talk about vasculature, we have arteries, we have veins, we also have nerves that run through there as well too. So things need to be moving regularly in order to help to go and clear out any congestion, any stagnant fluid that's there. When we have a lot of stagnation there, that leads to inflammation. And when we have inflammation, if you already know, then that leads to a bunch of problems where you're going to start having pain, you're going to have limitation in movement, and then it can be either the chicken or the egg. It can be like the inflammation and issues with regards to the pelvic organ, so any of the genital, urinary areas, and that can have an impact then on the musculoskeletal structure, so whether on the muscles or the bones, or then it can be inflammation in the muscles, in the bony structure, and because of the limited mobility, limited circulation of those tissues, that can have an impact on the pelvic organs. So it can be either or, and with a lot of inflammation, one thing that I can think of definitely is endometriosis, which is a big one. That it's not just inflammation of the uterus, like the lesions can actually spread into various areas of the abdominal cavity, and then you're going to have pain, pretty much permeating throughout that lower region of your body. So it's really important to make sure that you're continuing to keep things moving in this area. And so I did talk about the lymph system a little bit and the importance of it, and again that there's just a huge concentration there. And I wanted to bring out and just provide another example for you as well. So I'm just going to take out the organs that are here, and actually I'm going to keep this one. So here I have, you have a little bit of the top part's the colon, the rest of it's the rectum, and then the lower part is the anus. And so then that has that connection down here. So I have it here because the rectum lies, posterior or to the back of your pelvis. And earlier in the first or the second part of the series, I talked a little bit about this third layer, the levator ani muscles that are there. And so obviously, there's connective tissue, there's fascia that runs along that area. And so if, just providing an example, so if someone is dealing with constipation, or they're dealing with any type of gastrointestinal issue, whether it's like IBS, SIBO. SIBO is going to be more small intestines, but any type of gastrointestinal issue, and you're getting whether it's constant constipation, you're getting diarrhea, you're having to strain in order to have a bowel movement, then it's going to have an impact on those underlying tissues that sit right behind it or sit right around it. And so again, you're having some type of inflammation with the intestinal area, then it will have an impact on the musculoskeletal area as well, because the musculoskeletal area sits so close to the bony pelvis. Then you can also have, some type of inflammation, some type of dysfunction, whether it's around the sacral area, the SI joints, the pelvis itself, maybe even further up in towards the low back. So it's never just, one particular area that we're looking at, but we want to make sure that we're looking at the whole area. So that's why I think that it's so important that we talk about the circulation and how the pelvis functions as a sump pump. Because again, we're thinking about the lower extremity or the legs that, just because we're dependent, gravity pulls us down, but it's the movement of our bodies, every time that we're walking, we're running, we're doing any type of movement that helps to encourage and promote that flow of all of our fluids back up through our circulatory system. So, it's more than just for heart health, but it just provides so much benefits, for other aspects of our bodies. So, again, it's just really important that we go and clear it up, and we're gonna spend some time to actually do that in just a little bit. So, I like to think of, so I'm spending a lot of time talking about the sump pump. I mean, definitely the sphincters have a big impact as well too, but coming back to the sump pump, so you can think of it almost as if like you have a hose, the hose has been sitting out in your yard for a long time, and then maybe you have like little rodents, or you have like ants crawling in there, you get some dirt in there, and then it backs up. So every time that you want to go and use your hose, it kind of spurts out. It doesn't have a nice steady flow. And so you can think of that as the same thing, not just for your circulation, but then also for, urinary, for your bowels, even for, again, those with who are vagina owners, but then even same thing for our uterus as well, and thinking about our menstrual flow. So wanting all of that, both, the movement of our urine, the movement of our feces, the movement of our blood, to not be stagnant, and that it's flowing the way that it should. But just by having, again, an understanding of how things should be moving, how they should be flowing, making sure that you are having a pretty balanced movement practice, so that you are getting that movement flowing very well, is important. And so lastly, before we move into this movement, is just talking about the sphincters. So as I mentioned, there's lots of sphincters, and obviously most of it's going to be tied to digestion, nothing that we're really going to be focusing on too much, but obviously when we're moving, that's going to have a big impact on our digestion and how much we're able to fully digest our food, and then allow that process of digestion, into from the small intestine into our colon, and then finally when it makes its way out through our anus. And then same thing in regards to the urinary sphincter, the urethral sphincter, the function of the pelvic floor muscles. So even if we are having any type of gastrointestinal issues, and again, if there's any type of inflammation anywhere in this area, it's going to have an impact on those muscles. And so if there's inflammation, whether it's in the rectum, or inflammation in the bladder, then if those muscles aren't able to contract, if the performance of the muscle, the motor function of that muscle is impacted because of the inflammation, it's going to have an impact on how well the sphincters work as well. And that, is the same thing further up, if you're going up towards the hiatal hernia. Again, we think of pelvic floor diaphragm, respiratory diaphragm. If the diaphragm isn't functioning the way that it should, it's going to have an impact on that hiatal sphincter as well too, and that can lead to hiatal hernias as well. So we're going to move into our movement practice. We're going to just kind of tie everything together. So take a moment just to kind of clear everything off of your mat. You will need, you may need a block. So I would have a block handy for yourself, and obviously have a yoga mat and some clear space, and then we'll start. All right, so we're going to move into our movement part of this class. So one movement practice before we kind of get up and actually move a little bit more is which is a really fun movement that I like to actually play with, which is like pelvic walking. And so, when we talk about the pelvis and we think like, oh, well, most of the movement, especially like a lot of yoga practice, is very focused on what the hips are doing. And so with this pelvis walking, you can actually kind of get a sense of just how much movement, how much play is in place with pelvic walking, and then just a lot of the muscle. So then kind of coming back to part 2, where we talked about a lot of the stabilization, the support system of our pelvis. So what we're going to do first is actually come into a long sitting position. So I will actually face this way, because then you can actually see a little bit better. We're going to be in a long sitting position. And so what essentially we're going to be doing is we're going to be initiating this movement with our pelvis. So I'm going to be shifting weight onto my right hip, and then allowing this left leg to go forward. And going to be shifting weight onto my left hip and then allowing that right leg to go forward. So I'm going to be going to my right, shifting to my left, and right, and then left. So I'm walking, or this pelvis walking, in order to get my body to move a little bit. So essentially what you should be feeling is that every time that you're shifting onto that one leg, you're getting a little bit of contraction. A lot of it's going to be like the QL, quadratus lumborum, some of your paraspinal muscles as well that are working, and maybe even a little bit of some glute action too when you're doing this as you're walking yourself forward. And then you're going to do the same thing backward. So walking yourself backward. So I like to do this movement. I first discovered this when I was taking some circus type classes, and it's a great way of warming up this part of the body. Okay, so you can play with this a little bit. So maybe going, a lap, depending on how long your living room is, and just going forward and then going backwards. And then the last one, so I'm going to face this way so that you can see better, is just the lateral movement. So again, you're going to be shifting the weight over onto your left and then over towards the right. You might not feel like you're going to be going very far, but actually you are. Well, maybe you're not actually, but you are actually moving. So as you're shifting that weight, then I almost like to think, because we talked about the ischial tuberosity and how much they actually, do move. And again, a lot of it is because of the action of what the pelvis is doing. So I'm kind of, in a way, shortening up here on the top part of my ilium as I allow my ischium or my ischial tuberosity to actually widen and then get myself to move in that direction. So the right side is really doing most of the work, and then the left is, I guess in a way kind of going along for the ride. And then you can do the same thing on the other side. And I like this because then it plays into a little bit of the rotation that I need in my hip as I'm moving. Then feeling for that rotation that occurs in that hip. So play with that movement of moving back and forth. All right, so now we're gonna move into the movement portion just to kind of tie everything together. So I would say that a lot of this is really inspired by my previous practice where I practiced shadow yoga several years ago. And I like this because, with shadow yoga, there is very much a groundedness to it. And there's a lot, I wouldn't say it's like, hip opening, but there's a lot of work of the muscles in the legs and the hips, deep into the pelvis as well. Those pelvic floor muscles, you'll definitely feel it, where they're getting like lengthened, or where they're also having to engage in order to provide that support. So where you're going to get a chance to feel for it. So I would recommend that you play this part, a few times, just to kind of get a sense of the flow. I will go through it first. So I'll go through it first on one side, and then I will kind of talk you through it, just so you can get a sense of what it looks like. And I would even, if you purchase this series and you want to go back to it, to listen to it again, or if you miss some things, definitely, do this class, see how it feels in your body, and then go back, do more of the myofascial work that we did in the second part. Then come back to this video and practice this movement and just see how different it feels, whether it just feels a lot more, engaged, feel a little bit more length. It just sinks a little bit better compared to where it may feel a little bit disjointed, before doing some of the myofascial work. Because I already have, and my body's pretty warmed up, so I feel a little bit more fluid doing it. But if you're, watching this one first, or, if it's been a couple of days since you did the myofascial work, do this practice, feel how it feels in your body. Again, that's how you establish your baseline. I was like, okay, this is where I need to spend a little bit more time, do some of the myofascial work, then come back to it, and then just notice that difference. I really love doing before and afters. Okay, so I'm gonna start off in what in the movement world we call a Cossack squat. So I'm gonna move through everything first, and then I'll talk through it. Okay, so what you're going to be doing first is starting off in this what we call like a Cossack squat position. So you're going to start off, if you haven't done this before, so let's start off standing. So you're going to start off standing, so feet width hip distance apart, and then you can just slowly start to walk your feet out just a little bit wider to where it feels a little bit comfortable for you, okay? You're going to place your hands on your hips, and then I want the movement to be led by your hips, so kind of coming into a hip hinge, so you're hinging at the hips, and then you can grab a hold of your block if you have it handy, so you can start off tall, lower, whatever position feels comfortable for you. And then you're gonna walk that block all the way down. So if you don't have the flexibility, or if there's a lot of tightness along that inner thigh area, then you can hold on to the block, you can come up a little bit higher. So this leg is still bent, and I'm still keeping myself in a hip hinge. So I'm not rounding through my back, so I'm still in that hip hinge, okay? So I'm just gonna face forward again. So as I'm in that hip hinge, depending on what that position is, you can hang out here. If you want to explore going a little bit further down, then you can, okay? And then I'm slowly walking my hands down. So I walk them down if you feel like you need to just kind of plop down. But a lot of that is also looking at that control. So when you saw me doing it initially, there's a lot of control as I'm coming down. Again, you might feel a lot of tightness in the hamstrings. Again, hamstrings attached to your ischial tuberosity. So just note, you should be able to, or noting at least how much flexibility you have compared to when you're in downward dog position compared to where you're in this sitting position. And then allowing this knee to drop down. So again, if you don't have a lot of internal rotation, it's helpful to have a block, a pillow underneath that knee. Totally fine to just kind of hang out here in this position as you just allow yourself to stay here and stretch, okay? So you can either hang out here, you can kind of be in a diagonal as you come into a forward fold, or reaching towards your opposite foot. And then you're gonna lift all the way back up. You're gonna lift this leg back up, coming back into a neutral position. So here is where I like this part of the practice, because it really requires you to get all of that muscle work, that energy. You're really focusing and bringing it into the center in order for you to bring yourself up. So if that isn't possible for you right now, or if you're feeling like you're really struggling, then have the support of one hand behind you in order to bring yourself up, and you can bring yourself back up onto a block, okay? Otherwise, if you feel like this is something that you want to work with, you're really going to ground down into this split, the one that's standing there, and then you can practice. So I'm also grounding down into that heel, and then I'm lifting up. So I'm allowing the hips to lift, and you just kind of practice it back and forth. So yes, I need to engage my core. I need to engage my pelvic floor muscles as well. And again, it could be on the exhale as you lift up. So then you're in that position. And then I walk my hands, and I bring myself all the way into this position. So I'm kind of coming into a hip flexor stretch. So you can either hang out here depending on what feels comfortable for you. You can always come up a little bit higher, having 2 blocks on either side as needed. You can always come into, bring the arms up a little bit higher and allow your gazes to shift up, or you can just rest your hands on your knees. So with this, I'm never just passively going into the pose, so I'm very active here. So yes, this is passively stretching, but also I'm grounding down into this foot, so I'm feeling my glutes really on fire in order to create that stability. I'm not just kind of dumping into that pose, but I'm holding a little bit of some integrity here while I'm holding, okay? So then I move into my hamstrings. So my hands ground down, again, either onto a block or onto the floor. And again, I'm going to hip hinge because I'm not rounding through my back. So I'm sending my hips back as I lengthen out this leg. If the hamstrings are tight, then you can bend that knee, but you still want to maintain that neutral spine, drawing the hips back. If you have the length in the back of your leg, then you can straighten out the leg. You can point the toes, you can flex the foot, whatever feels comfortable for you. And then I bring myself back into that hip flexor stretch. You can actually uncurl the toes and then come back into that hip flexor stretch. And then I'm gonna shift again, or have the block come up a little bit higher, and then walk, and then come to the other side, okay? And then you're gonna repeat that flow, or again, you can use your hands to drop yourself down, or maintaining that control to drop your hips down, allowing yourself to come into internal rotation. Again, having a block or some support underneath your knee, holding here. Internal rotation is really hard for some folks just because we don't really spend that much time in internal rotation, especially if we're sitting a lot. So, and again, it's going to feel very different compared to what positions you're in. That's why I think it's important to really allow this to be an exploratory practice, not to try to have it be an end goal and try to get all the way towards your foot. Like, just notice, how does it feel to go into this position and go into a forward fold compared to when your leg is out in front. It's going to feel very different. So again, all of this is really about exploration and discovery, okay? So then you're in this position, that hamstring stretch. Then you can come back up, and you're going to bring yourself back into external rotation of that hip. Again, use the support of your hands as needed. Otherwise, even here, you can just kind of shifting forward and back. Otherwise, you can use your arms, so you're counterbalancing. So pressing into that front foot, into that heel, use your arms to help you to lift up. And then you can play with moving back and forth. And then you're holding there. And then you're going to shift, coming into that hip flexor stretch. Again, whether having the support of the blocks or coming up here, allowing the arms to lift up, so that way you're also creating that elongation through the midline, all the way up through your diaphragm. Making sure that that front foot, that's staying nice and supported, you're not dumping into this pose. So keeping a little bit of some lift here. And then both hands come down, lengthen out through that back leg. Again, you can either keep that foot flexed or pointed. Again, bring yourself back where that front knee's bent. Uncurl the toes. And then shifting back into that Cossack squat, okay? So this is a movement practice that you can play with. Again, a lot of it is inspired through shadow yoga. So if you're familiar with that practice, then this may be something really great. But I think then you can at least allow the emphasis to really be on what the pelvic floor, what those muscles are doing, and all those supporting structures are doing for you as well. So, you know, give this practice a try. And again, as I mentioned, do it before and after. Notice how different it feels, especially when you're doing those Cossack squats and you're doing a lot of those hamstring lengtheners, to spend some time along the glutes, along the inner thighs with some of those massage therapy balls that we did in part 2, and then come back to this practice and see how things have changed and shifted for you. Even doing some of the ball work just on the perineum, because you might not even know how tight a lot of those pelvic floor muscles, you know, especially the levator ani, and just how much pull that they can have on your pelvis. So allow this to, again, be an exploratory practice for you. So thank you so much for coming and being a part of this 3-part series. I'm hoping that you enjoyed it, that you learned something from it. And I look forward to seeing you with other classes that I'll be holding through the Connective. Thanks again.